All right, for the last section of this week, I want to talk a little bit about ethics. I don't think it's ever appropriate for me to teach an AI class without at least touching on ethics a little bit. And I would argue as you begin to build out these tools, it's also important for you to talk with your product team about the ethics and the implications of using these models and tools within your own service. Um, you guys should know that there will likely be some blowback or like some pushback on using various tools, and you should have an argument for why you think it's important both internally and externally. So obviously, I'm not a lawyer. I do not give legal advice. If you work at a startup, you should definitely consult lawyers before getting into this world, especially a startup or any other company. Especially because there are lots of lawsuits in the world right now around this data and materials. You should talk, if you're going to use a third-party provider for your models, you should talk about, what sort of legal ramifications exist within their models, and, whether they're going to accept fault or whether you would. Like, there's lots of issues to think about. Like, I actually worked on a video for the White Stripes for Sony this summer, and I think it took longer to make a decision on the legal implications of using AI tools in making the video than it did to make the video itself. So, it's fair to say that there's a lot going on in the world of this space right now, and definitely please have these conversations with your own internal team before building anything. It's really important. And again, I don't think we can talk about AI tools without discussing the ethical implications of these tools. Like, it is really important right now. We're seeing so many people worrying about losing their jobs, worrying about being put out of work. Hell, even as a designer, like, we're worrying about this because it affects us as well as engineers and other folks too. So, it is important to think about this beyond just the number crunching of does this going to make us more money or less money kind of thing. Personally, I do see a difference in an individual using an AI tool versus a company leveraging AI tools. It's a lot of it comes down to scale. A lot of it comes down to, I as an individual artist can't make millions and millions of dollars by utilizing this tool, whereas, a company with a couple 100,000 users probably could, whether it's saving them money or whether they can charge more for it. There's just something different about, a single artist using these tools versus a company using these tools, knowing that a lot of the data set is coming from existing companies or existing artists. So especially in the, in both the text to image as well as text to text world, there's currently lawsuits against Midjourney and DALL-E and other teams. And then there's on the image creation side, there's also a lawsuit pending against OpenAI's ChatGPT. I think the New York Times is bringing that lawsuit forward. Again, I used to work at the Times, but I had nothing involved to do with that. And I think we're just seeing this big question of is it legal or is it ethical for us to use other people's work to build our models on top of? And I want to highlight that these lawsuits are really more of a legal concern, but there's actually ethical concerns to think about. And I try to emphasize that I think legal and ethical are two different things, right? Legal is a thing that you are allowed to do. But whether or not a legal thing is ethical is actually completely different. There are lots of unethical things that are illegal, and there are lots of illegal things that I think are ethical. And I think in these cases with AI tools especially, both are real concerns. So when we talked about the process of making an AI model, right, it's about creating a big data set. And what we've learned over the past couple of years is that the biggest data set creates the biggest models. Now, that's not always true, but it's a safe bet that if you get the most data imaginable, you can make the best model possible. That's essentially what ChatGPT is. That's what DALL-E is. That's what a lot of these image generation tools are. Now, the problem is that, there's only so many copyright-free pieces of text in the world. There's only so many copyright-free images that are in the world. That what people have realized is they need copyrighted works to make their models better. Those tend to be higher quality. They have a diversity that you can't get through copyright-free material. So I'm just going to be blunt. These companies steal that data. I don't think there's any other way to describe it. Now, is that ethical? I come from the copyleft world where artists do it in a contextual way that I think is actually, if not unethical, at least like more like ethically ambiguous, let's say. Whereas I gotta be honest, like I don't see that here. I think many of these companies are stealing copyright images and copyright text in order to produce a better model for them, purely for their own service. And that's a tricky one. Like it is clearly unethical. Whether or not it's illegal, we're going to find out in the next couple of years, I think. And it's different when one artist, it's different when an individual does it versus some of the largest companies in the world doing it. So it's a big challenge. I also recognize that there is a clear sort of competitive issue here, which is like, well, if we don't do it, but every other company does it, and those companies succeed and survive, and we don't, was it worth it? Or like, is it ethically fine to like, tank a company because we don't want to get in the muck with other companies? And I recognize that that's a real problem. So again, this is a complicated field, and I think it's one thing that, again, like I don't want to, as we go through the next couple weeks of this class and begin to investigate these tools and these models, I don't want to get to a point where like it just sounds like I think these things are great, and they're like not a problem with any of these models. I think there's a problem with every one of these models. There's also a problem with software in general of like stealing from open source people, but that's a whole other class. So we exist in ethically ambiguous times and ethically ambiguous jobs, and I don't want to mistake that to not mention that as we teach this class. And I hope when we actually talk about some individual models, we'll highlight some of that as well. One of the interesting things I think about it, this is like, is I actually think like an interesting part of this material is that if you work at a business of a decent size, you likely have a lot of good data. And one of the challenges I see here is like, you could actually leverage that data in a very good use case. So again, let's use the use case of the headlines from MailChimp, right? So like MailChimp has access to millions and millions and millions of headlines. They could scrape all that data and say, based on a couple of factors, we know this is a great headline for you. Now, maybe I don't care about that because I just write headlines based on what other people do. But maybe there are other people that are working marketing who like their job is like they write the best headlines, and now all of a sudden that material is kind of starting to be available to other people. I don't know. There's some tricky about that. So it actually is like, it feels better, right? Because you're actually saying like, actually we're using all the similar data, using the same tool for the same purpose. It feels a little bit more direct and singular, and maybe our terms of service actually like allow us to do this. But I think there's still an ethical problem there of like, there are some people who are like, no, that's my headline. Like I wrote that, I thought it up completely myself, whether that's true or not. And now you're scraping it and using it for other people without compensating me or without understanding that. And there's kind of two issues that concern here. One is just like, what does that mean for trust in the system? What does that mean about your brand image? Like that sort of thing. But also, shoot, I just lost my train of thought there. What was I going to say? Oh, but also like, what does it mean to write unique headlines anymore? Or what does it mean to have unique material in this? I think this is like the challenge of like professional designers or professional artists who are like, I spent half my life like sort of perfecting my art, and now you can make it with these tools in under a couple seconds. Is that good? Is that bad? It's probably good for the person that has never been able to do it, but it's certainly bad in that it sort of ruins the expertise of certain things. So again, I don't have an answer here. Like there's no like, hey, you should use this or you shouldn't. I will argue that a lot of it comes down to what are the legal outcomes, obviously, because that's going to be important for your business. But then also like, is it actually solving a user problem, right? Like I can make the argument that like if 100 artists are upset, but I'm helping thousands of people make their business better, in a purely Machiavellian way, you could say like that's actually a better solution. I don't want to go that far, but I do think there's an argument made that like some of these tools are good and are solving a real need within the market. And maybe the solution is actually like, hey, let's just do that, but let's also fairly compensate the right people. Let's compensate the people that are giving us that data. Or, that sort of black box model we're seeing, maybe we need to actually spend a little bit of time to figure out how to undo that black box model. So we could say like, hey, it turns out that like this one marketing person that uses MailChimp, like their email headlines work the best, and our model is consistently using a lot of their traits, and we should therefore compensate that person. I would love to see a better compensation model with a lot of this stuff. It's tricky because it gets into like micro payments and that sort of thing, which have always been problematic in the software space. But I would love a better model for that, and maybe there are people working on that. And if I find any of that, I will be happily share it. But I think it's a big area of concern. So just in general, I think ethics are one of those challenging areas that we need to constantly recalibrate toward and constantly rethink of. Yeah, so I already covered this. So leveraging your own customer data is likely the best training data you can use. But again, you should really think about whether this is allowed in your terms of service, talk to your legal team, think about what the implications of this are. But it's important to consider and think through. And the last thing I'll talk about here is obviously in signing up for this class, I assume you already know about how divisive AI is. And while I see tech companies really jumping at the chance to use these tools, in part because I think there is a hint that they solve a real user need, I'm not yet sold on the fact that customers think these are good things. This would be a great research project for pretty much every company, is like, go talk to your customers and see if they think AI is actually solving their needs. I think for a lot of people, it actually does. Like a lot of people, I talk to people like every day who are like, ChatGPT does a lot of stuff for me I could never do before. Like I feel like way more productive because of these tools, that sort of thing. Personally, I do not find ChatGPT to make me more productive. I find it to be a kind of terrible tool. I find it doesn't do anything of what I want it to do. But for other folks, it's like, no, this is great. This is exactly what I want. So, maybe you need to talk to your user base and understand if this really works for them or if it doesn't. But I think there's always a chance of blowback, especially with the current sort of hype and anti-hype of these tools. And being aware of what that might mean for your customers is good for your experience, right? If you are like immediately distrusting of this product experience, then you're not going to win them over unless you make a really compelling case or have a really good product definition for it. So again, this is even beyond just like, this isn't just like ethical in like an abstract way. It's ethical in terms of like, how do your customers see it, and does that match up with what they're expecting? So all this to say, like, I think we'll talk a little bit more about ethics as we go through the rest of this class, but it is a complex topic, and I'm happy to talk over Slack more about ways to make answers for this. But there are no easy answers to this, I don't think, and I think that's one of the challenges that we face as designers working in this space.